I don't care what your fancy government job was, Patterson. Those cameras are a violation of privacy, and I'm going to see you in court, lose your house, and run you out of this neighborhood like the creep you are." Karen Whitmore's voice cut through the morning air like nails on a chalkboard, her perfectly manicured finger stabbing toward my security cameras with the fury of someone who'd never been told no in her privileged life. Her Botoxed face had turned that special shade of purple that comes from a lifetime of screaming at service workers and getting her way through pure intimidation. "Furthermore," she continued, her voice rising to a shriek that probably woke half the neighborhood, "I'm filing a police report today claiming you're recording children, and I'm going to make sure every parent in this community knows they have a predator living among them." I stood there in my work clothes, having just gotten home from my morning jog, watching this woman I'd barely spoken to in 2 years launch into what could only be described as a public execution attempt. Karen lived 4 houses down, but she patrolled the entire development like she owned every blade of grass. At 53, she looked like what would happen if a country club manager merged with a prison warden. All fake smiles and iron control. "Ma'am, those cameras only record my own property," I said, keeping my voice level even as my blood pressure spiked. "They were installed after someone broke into my garage." "Don't you dare ma'am me," she screeched, stepping closer like she was ready to physically fight. "I am the head of the HOA Compliance Committee, and I have lawyers on speed dial who eat people like you for breakfast. Those cameras violate Section 47 of our community covenant, and they're coming down today, or I'm going to destroy you." Her eyes had that wild gleam of someone drunk on power, someone who'd been crushing people under her heel for so long she forgot some of us know how to fight back. What Karen Whitmore didn't know was that she'd just declared war on someone who'd spent 22 years taking down federal criminals. She had no clue what kind of beast she'd just awakened. "Lady," I said quietly, stepping off my porch, "you just made the biggest mistake of your life. Let me tell you about Karen." Karen Whitmore was what you'd get if Cruella Devil had a baby with a middle school principal. All fake sweetness covering a core of pure malice. She moved through our neighborhood like a shark in suburban waters, her blonde hair sprayed into a helmet that could survive a Category 5 hurricane, wearing designer workout clothes that had never seen a drop of sweat. At 53, she had the kind of surgical perfection that screamed, "I destroy people for sport." She'd moved into Maple Grove Estates 5 years ago and immediately began her hostile takeover. Within 2 years, she'd maneuvered herself onto the HOA board, and within 3, she was running the compliance committee like her personal fiefdom. Karen had a talent for finding the most obscure rules in our 847-page HOA covenant and wielding them like weapons against anyone who dared to live their lives without her approval. The woman was a master manipulator. At community meetings, she'd smile sweetly while discussing maintaining property values and protecting our family-friendly environment. But behind closed doors, she was ruthless. She'd driven out 3 families in the past 2 years with her relentless complaints, fines, and legal threats. The Johnsons moved after she reported them for having their garbage can visible from the street for 37 minutes past pickup time. The Martinez family left after she claimed their vegetable garden violated the Aesthetic Standards Clause. Karen had perfected the art of selective enforcement. Her cronies on the board could park boats in their driveways, let their lawns grow wild, and paint their houses whatever color they wanted. But God help you if you weren't in her inner circle and dared to install a mailbox that was half an inch taller than regulation height. What made Karen truly dangerous wasn't just her pettiness, it was her intelligence. She knew exactly how to use the system, how to file complaints that couldn't be easily dismissed, and how to make life miserable for anyone who crossed her. She collected information on every household like she was building dossiers, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. And now she'd set her sights on me. I should have known Karen would strike fast and dirty, but I wasn't prepared for the gut punch waiting for me when I got home from work 3 days later. There, stapled to my front door like a scarlet letter, was a bright orange violation notice that made my hands shake with pure rage. The citation claimed my security cameras violated Section 47.3.b of the HOA covenant regarding surveillance equipment that may compromise neighbor privacy. The fine was $500, with an additional $100 per day until the cameras were removed. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was the note scribbled at the bottom in Karen's handwriting: compliance inspection conducted October 15th. Multiple privacy violations documented. Removal required within 48 hours or legal action will commence. My blood turned to ice water. That bitch had been on my property. I rushed inside and pulled up my security footage, my heart hammering as I scrolled back to that morning. And there she was, Karen Whitmore, bold as brass, standing in my driveway at 10:47 a.m. with a measuring tape, a digital camera, and a notebook. 4:43 minutes, I watched this woman trespass on my property like she owned it. She photographed my cameras from every angle, measured distances, peered through my garage windows, and even tried to look into my living room. The woman had conducted a full reconnaissance mission on my home, and my own cameras had recorded every second of her breaking the law. But the footage that made my vision go red was from 2 weeks earlier, the day after I'd installed the cameras. There was Karen with her 2 cronies, Margaret Chen and Susan Rodriguez, standing at the edge of my driveway like generals planning an invasion. "We need to get rid of him," Karen's voice came through crystal clear on the audio. "He's not going to be controllable like the others. People like him think they're above community standards." That's when it hit me like a freight train. This wasn't about cameras or privacy or community standards. This was about power, pure and simple. Karen saw me as a threat to her little kingdom, and she was going to use every dirty trick in her playbook to crush me like she'd crushed God knows how many other families. She'd just picked a fight with the wrong guy. Being a reasonable man, I decided to try diplomacy first. I researched every relevant law, gathered my documentation, and requested a meeting with the HOA board to contest the violation. The meeting was scheduled for the following Thursday at 7 p.m. in the community center. I walked into that room armed with facts, property surveys, legal precedents, and photographic evidence showing that my cameras captured only my own property. I had documentation from the manufacturer proving the camera's limited field of view, and I'd even hired a surveyor to confirm my property boundaries. Karen sat at the head of the conference table like a queen holding court, flanked by her loyal board members. I presented my case calmly and professionally, explaining that the cameras were a necessary security measure and that they violated no laws or legitimate HOA rules. "The covenant clearly states that surveillance equipment cannot compromise neighbor privacy," Karen interrupted, not even looking at my evidence. "Your cameras create an atmosphere of suspicion and discomfort in our family-friendly community." "Mrs. Whitmore, I have documented proof that these cameras only record my property," I replied, sliding the surveyor's report across the table. She pushed it back without reading it. "The appearance of surveillance is just as harmful as actual surveillance. These cameras make our neighbors feel unsafe in their own homes." That's when Margaret Chen chimed in, "We've received multiple complaints about your cameras making people uncomfortable." "From whom?" I asked. "We can't reveal that information," Susan Rodriguez added quickly. "Privacy concerns." It was a kangaroo court. They'd already made their decision before I walked in the door. The vote was 6-2 to uphold the violation, with only 2 board members showing any interest in the actual facts. As I packed up my materials, Karen leaned back in her chair with a satisfied smirk. "You have 30 days to remove the cameras, Mr. Patterson. After that, we'll be forced to take legal action." I looked her dead in the eye. "Mrs. Whitmore, you're making a serious mistake." "Is that a threat?" she asked, her voice rising. "No, ma'am," I replied calmly. "That's a promise." The next morning, I placed a call to my old colleague, Sarah Mitchell, who now worked as a civil rights attorney specializing in HOA disputes. We'd worked together on several federal cases during my investigative career, and I knew she had no patience for petty tyrants who abused their authority. "Tom, HOA boards overstep their bounds all the time," Sarah said after I explained the situation. "But what you're describing sounds like selective enforcement and possibly even harassment. Send me everything you have." I overnight her copies of the HOA covenant, my violation notice, the security footage of Karen trespassing, and all my documentation proving the camera's legality. Sarah called me back the next day with interesting news. "Your HOA covenant doesn't actually prohibit security cameras," she said. "Section 47 deals with commercial surveillance systems, not residential security. They're misinterpreting their own rules, probably intentionally. I'm drafting a response that should make them back down." The legal letter Sarah sent was a masterpiece. It detailed the HOA's misapplication of their own rules, cited relevant privacy laws proving my cameras were legal, and included still images from my security footage showing Karen trespassing on my property. The letter demanded immediate withdrawal of the violation notice and warned of potential legal action for harassment and selective enforcement. Karen's response came within 48 hours. Instead of backing down, she doubled down. The HOA's lawyer sent a letter claiming that while the cameras might be technically legal, they violated the spirit of the community standards and created a hostile environment for neighbors. They demanded removal within 15 days or face a lawsuit for $50,000 in damages. "They're bluffing," Sarah said when I called her. "But they're also escalating. Be careful, Tom. People like this don't like to lose." She had no idea how right she was. Karen's revenge campaign started small but escalated like a cancer. First, it was my garbage cans, reported for being placed on the street at 6:48 p.m. when the allowable time was 7 p.m. Then my lawn got cited for being 0.3 inches too tall, measured with a ruler by Karen herself while I was at work. But Karen wasn't content with petty violations. She wanted to destroy me completely. She started telling neighbors I was a dangerous individual with concerning surveillance equipment that was recording their children. Within a week, parents were crossing the street to avoid me. Kids who used to wave when they rode their bikes suddenly wouldn't make eye contact. I went from being a friendly neighbor to a suspected predator based on Karen's lies. The harassment got personal fast. Someone, and I had a pretty good idea who, called my employer claiming I was using federal resources for personal vendettas. My supervisor had to waste time investigating the bogus complaint, and I could see the doubt in his eyes even after I was cleared. Karen recruited flying monkeys throughout the neighborhood. Mrs. Henderson started photographing my house daily from her window. The teenage kid next door began revving his motorcycle at 6 a.m. sharp, right outside my bedroom. My mailbox got reported for a microscopic rust spot that was supposedly degrading community aesthetics. But the moment I knew Karen had declared total war came on a Saturday morning when I was trying to fix my sprinkler system. I looked up to see her marching across my lawn with an entourage. Margaret Chen, Susan Rodriguez, and 3 other neighbors I barely knew, all walking in formation like Karen's personal army. "Mr. Patterson," Karen announced loudly, performing for the growing crowd of neighbors who'd come out to watch the show, "we're here to give you one final opportunity to remove those illegal surveillance devices before we're forced to protect this community from your predatory behavior." I stood up slowly, mud on my hands and fire in my chest. "Mrs. Whitmore, those cameras are staying exactly where they are." "Then you've made your choice," she declared, her voice carrying across the entire neighborhood. "We'll be filing a restraining order against you, reporting your illegal activities to the police, and I'll personally make sure every parent in this community knows exactly what kind of person you really are." The crowd was eating it up. Karen had successfully painted me as the neighborhood monster, and they were all here to watch her slay the dragon. But then she made the mistake that would destroy her. "We'll also be reporting your suspicious federal connections to the FBI," she added with a venomous smile. "After all, we don't know who you really are or what you're capable of. Someone with your background, living among families with children, conducting surveillance, it's deeply concerning." The neighbors nodded along, completely under Karen's spell. But I just smiled. "Ma'am," I said quietly, "you have no idea what you just started." That afternoon, I made a decision that would change everything. I called my former supervisor at the FBI, Director James Morrison, who'd been after me for months to come back as a consultant on a federal task force investigating HOA corruption and civil rights violations. "Jim, remember that consulting position you offered me?" I said when he picked up. "I'm interested." "Tom, that's great news. When can you start?" "How about right now? I've got a perfect case study right in my own neighborhood." I spent the next 2 hours briefing Jim on Karen's harassment campaign, the selective enforcement, and the systematic abuse of power I'd witnessed in Maple Grove Estates. What I learned in return made my blood run cold. "Tom, we've been investigating HOA corruption rings across the state," Jim explained. "These aren't just petty neighborhood disputes. We're talking about kickback schemes, selective enforcement for profit, and systematic civil rights violations. Your HOA might be connected to a much bigger network." The next morning, I installed additional security cameras. Not just on my property, but positioned to capture the entire street, the community mailboxes, and the common areas. All perfectly legal under federal surveillance guidelines, and all clearly marked with official federal task force signage. I also erected a small but prominent sign in my front yard, "Property under federal surveillance, FBI task force investigation in progress." Karen's reaction was immediate and explosive. She stormed over to my house at 7:23 a.m., her face purple with rage. "You can't do this," she screamed, jabbing her finger at the sign. "This is harassment. This is intimidation." "Ma'am, this is a federal investigation," I replied calmly, adjusting one of the new cameras to get a better angle on her meltdown. "You're welcome to file a complaint with the FBI if you have concerns." "I'm calling the police," she shrieked. "Please do," I said with a smile. "I'm sure they'd love to hear about your trespassing and harassment campaign." That's when Karen's mask finally slipped completely. The refined HOA queen disappeared, replaced by a woman capable of pure venom. "You think you're so smart," she hissed. "But I have connections you can't imagine. I'll destroy you, and I'll destroy your property values, and I'll make sure everyone in this neighborhood knows exactly what kind of person you really are." Every word was captured in crystal-clear HD video and audio. 3 days after my sign went up, I got an unexpected visitor. Margaret Chen, Karen's former lieutenant, stood nervously on my doorstep clutching a manila envelope. "Mr. Patterson, I need to talk to you," she said, glancing around nervously. "Can we speak privately?" Margaret had been Karen's most loyal supporter on the HOA board, but something had clearly shaken her resolve. She sat in my living room, hands trembling as she opened the envelope. "I couldn't sleep after what happened the other day," she began. "Karen's behavior has gotten completely out of control, and I started asking questions I should have asked years ago." What Margaret revealed made my federal task force investigation look like amateur hour. Karen had been running a systematic extortion scheme for years. She would target homeowners with manufactured violations, fine them heavily, and then offer to resolve the issues through her husband's construction company at inflated prices. The Martinez family hadn't left because of their vegetable garden. They'd been forced out after refusing to pay $15,000 for landscaping corrections that would have cost $3,000 with any other company. The Johnsons had paid Karen's husband $8,000 to build a compliant garbage can enclosure before they finally gave up and moved. "She's made over $200,000 in the past 3 years, Margaret whispered, showing me bank records she'd copied from Karen's HOA files. "She keeps 2 sets of books, one for the community and one for her personal records." But the financial corruption was just the beginning. Margaret had documentation showing that Karen had been filing false reports with city officials, claiming code violations that didn't exist to pressure homeowners into compliance. She'd even convinced the police to conduct wellness checks on residents who opposed her, claiming they were acting erratically or making threats. "There's more," Margaret said, pulling out a thick folder. "Karen's been collecting personal information on every resident, financial records, employment information, family details. She uses it to pressure people and destroy anyone who stands up to her." The folder contained photocopies of credit reports, background checks, and personal documents that Karen had no legal right to possess. She'd been running the HOA like an intelligence operation, gathering blackmail material on every resident in the community. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked. Margaret's eyes filled with tears. "Because I helped her. I was so caught up in her vision of a perfect community that I ignored what she was really doing. When I saw that federal investigation sign, I realized how serious this had become. I can't be part of this anymore." She stood to leave, then turned back. "Mr. Patterson, be careful. Karen knows you're dangerous to her operation. She's not going to give up easily." The monthly HOA meeting was scheduled for the following Tuesday. Word had spread through the neighborhood about my federal investigation sign, and the community center was packed with curious residents who'd never bothered to attend before. Karen sat at the head table, flanked by her remaining loyal board members, but I could see the stress in her face. She'd aged years in the past week, and her usual commanding presence seemed forced and brittle. I arrived 15 minutes early, carrying a laptop bag and a stack of documentation. Sarah Mitchell had driven up from the city to observe, and I noticed several neighbors who'd previously avoided me now nodding respectfully as I passed. "Before we begin tonight's meeting," Karen announced, her voice shakier than usual, "I want to address the false accusations and intimidation tactics being used by certain residents to disrupt our peaceful community." She launched into a prepared speech about how my security cameras and federal investigation sign were creating a climate of fear and violating the trust that held the community together. She painted herself as a victim of harassment and claimed my federal connections were being used to intimidate honest volunteers. It was a masterful performance, and I could see some residents nodding along. Karen had always been good at playing the victim when cornered. Then it was my turn to speak. "Thank you, Mrs. Whitmore," I said, standing slowly. "I appreciate the opportunity to address these concerns directly." I opened my laptop and connected it to the room's projection system. The first image that appeared was Karen's own handwriting on her private HOA records, showing the kickback payments from her husband's company. "Ladies and gentlemen, what you're seeing is evidence of systematic financial fraud conducted by your HOA board president," I began calmly. "Over the past 3 years, Mrs. Whitmore has used manufactured violations to extort over $200,000 from your neighbors." The room erupted in shocked murmurs. Karen shot to her feet, her face flushing red. "This is a lie. You can't prove any of this." I clicked to the next slide, bank records showing deposits from homeowners to Karen's personal account. Then another slide showing her husband's invoices at 3 times the market rate for compliance corrections. "These are copies of Mrs. Whitmore's own records, provided by a concerned board member who could no longer participate in this fraud," I continued. But the financial evidence was nothing compared to what came next. I played the audio recording of Karen's conversation about getting rid of me and making me not controllable like the others. Then came the video of her latest meltdown in my front yard, threatening to destroy me and my property values. The final presentation was the folder of personal information Karen had illegally collected on community residents. I didn't reveal the specific details that would have violated people's privacy, but I showed enough to demonstrate the scope of her surveillance operation. "This woman has been running a criminal enterprise disguised as community governance," I concluded. "She's violated federal privacy laws, committed financial fraud, and systematically destroyed families who dared to question her authority." Karen was hyperventilating by this point, her carefully constructed facade completely shattered. "You don't understand," she screamed at the stunned crowd. "I made this community what it is. I protected your property values. I kept out the undesirable elements." Susan Rodriguez tried to calm her down, but Karen was beyond reason. "These people don't deserve nice things. They don't understand what it takes to maintain standards. Without me, this place would be chaos." The room fell silent as everyone absorbed the magnitude of Karen's admission. This wasn't about community standards or property values. It was about one woman's desperate need to control everyone around her. The vote to remove Karen from the board was unanimous. The vote to dissolve the current HOA structure and start over was 47-3. The vote to support a full federal investigation was 48-2. Karen stormed out without another word, but not before giving me one final look of pure hatred. 6 months later, I stood in my front yard watching federal agents carry boxes of evidence out of Karen Whitmore's house while news cameras rolled. The woman who tried to destroy my life was now facing 23 federal charges, including mail fraud, extortion, racketeering, and civil rights violations. Her husband's construction company was being liquidated to pay restitution to the dozens of families they'd scammed over the years. The best part? Karen had triggered her own downfall by reporting me to the FBI. Her complaint about my suspicious federal connections had landed on my own supervisor's desk, launching the investigation that exposed her entire criminal enterprise. But the sweetest revenge wasn't watching Karen get arrested. It was seeing our community transform into something beautiful. The Martinez family had returned to their dream home, their lawsuit settled for $200,000 in damages. Their vegetable garden was now the crown jewel of the neighborhood, and Maria Martinez had been elected to head our new, reformed HOA board. The Johnsons moved back too, and their kids were playing in yards where they'd once been afraid to set foot. We'd planted a community garden where Karen's house used to be. The bank had foreclosed and sold to the HOA for pennies on the dollar. 27 fruit trees lined the walking path, each one dedicated to a family that had been driven out by Karen's reign of terror. A small plaque at the entrance read, "In memory of those who stood up to tyranny and helped restore our community." Margaret Chen had become our neighborhood historian, documenting Karen's crimes to make sure future residents understood how close we'd come to losing everything. She'd also helped 17 other communities across 3 states identify and remove their own corrupt HOA boards using our case as a template. My security cameras were still exactly where they belonged, now part of a community-wide system that actually protected families instead of spying on them. Property values had increased 23% since Karen's removal. Turns out people preferred living somewhere they wouldn't be terrorized by their own neighbors. The morning Karen was sentenced, I found a hand-drawn card in my mailbox from 8-year-old Sofia Martinez. "Thank you for making the mean lady go away so we could come home," it read, with a crayon drawing of our street filled with smiling families. But the real masterpiece was the letter I received from the FBI director commending our task force work. Karen's case had become a model for investigating HOA corruption nationwide. We'd taken down a criminal who thought she was untouchable, saved dozens of families from financial ruin, and helped reform laws protecting homeowners from HOA abuse. Karen Whitmore had spent years crushing people who couldn't fight back, thinking her little kingdom would last forever. She never imagined that someday she'd pick on someone who knew exactly how to bring down bullies like her. Someone who understood that the best revenge isn't just destroying your enemy, it's building something better from the ashes of their empire. These days, I work part-time consulting for other communities dealing with HOA corruption. My garage holds my completely restored tool collection, every piece my father owned, rebuilt through insurance money and careful hunting at estate sales. The thieves who started this whole mess were never caught, but in a way, I'm grateful they broke in. Without them, I never would have installed those cameras. Without those cameras, Karen never would have revealed her true nature. And without her declaration of war, our entire community never would have learned to fight back. Sometimes the best things come from the worst situations. Sometimes you have to go through hell to build heaven. And sometimes, the person who tries to destroy you ends up giving you exactly what you need to save everyone else. Karen taught me that monsters hide behind community standards and fake smiles. But she also taught me that ordinary people have extraordinary power when they decide they've had enough. The mean lady was gone. The neighborhood was safe. And justice, sweet and complete, had finally come home. If you enjoyed watching this bully get exactly what she deserved, smash that subscribe button and hit the bell icon, because we've got plenty more revenge stories where the good guys win and the bullies get destroyed. Drop a comment below and tell me, what's the craziest HOA story you've ever heard? Have you ever had to deal with a neighborhood tyrant like Margaret? I read every single comment, and your stories might just inspire our next episode. Subscribe to AS Stories for more epic revenge tales where justice always wins. Trust me, you don't want to miss what's coming next.